Hi. So this is the beginning of the autobiographical story that I wanted to tell. And I thought it was a really good time to do it just because I've got some time off at the moment. I've been doing a bit less work recently. So it seems an opportune moment. And I've been looking back at earlier chapters in my life recently. I realised that whilst I do a lot of writing about fictional things, I actually have never sat down and written an actual account of my own life and how I've got through to where I am and the various highs and lows and different experiences over the years. So I thought actually it's quite interesting for anyone to do that, just so that you can look back at the most important moments and how you've developed and changed and what different life experiences you've had. So I think it's a really important thing for anyone to do, actually. I think everybody's got an interesting sort of story to share, really. Obviously, not all of it, but yeah, it's just trying to be concise, isn't it, really, and focus on what are the most important and interesting aspects of it, I suppose. And also just trying to be considerate about other people and realizing, of course, they're not characters in some story, but real people with real emotions. And so I'm going to try and portray things as accurately as I can recall. Obviously, from the earlier years, there's a lot less memories, as with anyone, just because it's so long ago. But there's some, and that I can still rely on. Obviously, stories start at a beginning with a birth, and it's always quite strange that you start with something that you don't remember, isn't it? So I was only told really the circumstances leading up to my birth and what happened those first few years. I think over the last few years, over the last decade, perhaps, and just given a bit more information, filling in the blanks, I suppose. So it's good starting at birth, of course, but your memory doesn't start there. So this is sort of based on information that I've been given from different sources, and so my parents had met in a hotel, one that I recently went to, oddly enough, and they'd been married for some years. They had another child, my older biological brother, Glyn, and and then they obviously consummated and had a second child. During the course of the pregnancy, my mother became ill at the time, my biological mother, and she was quite ill, ill enough to remain in hospital after the birth, in fact. She actually had contracted cancer, so she had to stay in hospital for some treatment at that time. In fact, I think she had her womb removed. So actually, and thankfully she recovered from that, from the operation. And it took a long time. I think she lost quite a lot of weight, and I think she was quite weak for some time and wasn't able to look after children because she was physically affected by the operation and the treatments. So I mean, it's quite an interesting start, actually. But mercifully, I didn't contract the cancer. I think the water around the womb actually had protected me. So I think sometimes it passes on from a mother to an infant they're carrying. But thankfully, on this occasion, it didn't. So I'm grateful for that, at least, and I'm glad that she did recover from her treatments. And just sorry that that happened, really. But situations, I guess, isn't it? Circumstances. But actually, before that, actually, there have been incidents at the house. My biological parents were bringing up the brother, and he's 3 years my senior, so he was 3 years old at that point. And I think there was an incident or something where my biological father had written down some writings that had really disturbed mother, and she was really concerned about the nature of those writings, and I think it had some really perverse thoughts in it, some really bad things involving sort of sexual acts that he maybe was imagining or fantasizing doing to others, And so that really had concerned her, I think, and she discussed that with her own mother, I think, to see what she felt about that, I suppose. There's no evidence, I should say, that he ever did anything to anyone, as far as we know, and maybe it was just writing down some awful thoughts that he'd had, and nevertheless, once she found those and discussed it with the mother, there was a concern there already. And what happened, I think, was once she was in hospital for a longer stay after the birth, the mother, what would be my maternal grandmother, Jessie, I think her name was, she then contacted the social services out of concern. I think she felt that, given the nature of the letter, she had her concerns about my father being left alone to look after two children while her daughter, my mother, was in the hospital. So she had her concerns and spoke to social services about that. I think that's how it happened. And so as a result of that, as I understand it, I was transferred with my brother to a children's unit, children's kind of institution, sort of like a care home, I suppose, but for children. And the both of us, myself and my brother, went there. I went there after the birth, and we both remained there for some time. I think while mother was recuperating in hospital, and she was recovering from the operation and that. But much to her anger, although they gave her back my oldest son, my oldest brother, her son, her firstborn son, on account of the fact, I guess, that they already had developed a bond with each other over those 3 years. But they kept me in care at that point, and in fact, they never returned me to her then. So I was fostered out to a different family at that point. And she remained understandably angry and upset about that. Her understanding when she allowed me into the care system, was that it would only be a temporary thing while she was ill. Once she'd recovered her strength physically and was able to become a mother and to bring up one son, she felt quite rightly that she would be okay to bring up both sons. But once the social services had placed me, the decision was made and it was not reversed at that point. So I think she understandably remained angry and upset about that, and felt, that she'd been let down, and she described it as that I'd been kidnapped, I suppose, from her. And looking back on it, I can see the social services might have had their concerns about the welfare of a child in that kind of situation where you don't know whether a father has got bad intentions or not, or whether they're capable of carrying out something or not, whether something is just purely fantasy and would never be acted upon, or not. It's hard to make that sort of assessment, I suppose. And but what I do find quite strange to me, having looked back on it, is the decision to allow one child to remain in that situation and yet not the other child. I find that somewhat inconsistent, to be honest. They actually allegedly told my mother, as far as I remember, she said that she would be able to leave the house carrying one child if anything should happen. So that they didn't feel that having one child would be such a risk as having two children. But I just feel that to me doesn't quite make sense, because you can't be there 24/7, 365, policing a child all the time, especially if you have somebody else living in the house you're concerned about. There are going to be occasional moments when your back's turned or when they're left alone with them, and that's bound to happen when they have, that level of contact over so long a period. And that I kind of look at it thinking, if one child is okay to be there, then so would two children. And if one child is not okay to be there and is potentially at risk, then so would two children be. She doesn't like the answer to that I have. that either you take both of them into care or you leave them both there and monitor the situation accordingly. So I find an inconsistency in it. But I suppose it's something beyond any of our control, and that was the situation that I was sort of born into, I suppose. And I say I don't know my father well enough to judge him and to know whether he did do anything or not. There's no evidence he ever did. No one's ever made those claims. But yeah, I've never really spoken to anyone that knew him apart from my mother, and she didn't really have any evidence that he did anything either. Just really that he'd written some terribly offensive things that that would be enough, that would warrant a concern from anyone. And so I was then placed in this temporary foster care, and I think, well, it was ongoing foster care actually. And I'm not sure how long, but I was in some sort of children's ward or some sort of children's home for some months before the placement into a foster family. And I obviously don't have any memories of those occasions, so I don't know what happened there. No idea, really. It's sort of no memory of it at all. And there's nobody to tell me about what happened either during those. That's slightly odd, actually, because obviously my mother didn't have any contact with me during that time. I gather she was able to visit at some point. She had some visitation rights for a while until the formal placement into a new family happened. I think I was relatively young when that happened. There was a foster family in Brislington, an area of Bristol. So they were chosen, and they fostered a variety of other children. They had 2 biological children of their own, Anna and Daniel, and they fostered a number of different children over a long period of time, actually. And some of them were quite short foster spells. You know, they would be there for a few weeks, sometimes even a few months. You know, it varied a lot. I remember a large number of different children. It would only be 1 or 2 at once. But generally, you know, over the many years, there will be quite a few that you'd see. And that lasted many, many years. I stayed with them for a very long time, up until about the age of 16, in fact. And so I suppose it's about 14 years that I was with them. And most of that time, their biological children, Anna and Daniel, both remained with them. And they also fostered another child by the name of Peter, and he stayed with them for a fairly long time as well, as did I. So we both were sort of long-term foster children with the same family. And so it was really kind of like 4 of us that were more consistently there for most of the time, for many, many years. And there would be occasional other foster child but they would be more transient and, you know, come and go sometimes. And so we lived in Brislington, and the foster parents had a house there, Sandy Park Road it was. It was a long, steep road with lots of shops on the high streets. There was a big church opposite called St Cuthbert's. That's where we went to church, in fact. I think there was a vicar called Geoffrey back then who we were quite friendly with. And the foster parents went there every Sunday, and we knew various people from the congregation there. And some of them would come over to babysit or to childmind for us on evenings when they went out to various prayer groups or wherever they went to. And you know, I'd have very sketchy memories back then, I suppose, because I was quite young. I remember I had quite a small bedroom, actually, and me and Peter shared a bedroom for some time, actually. And at one point there was a new wall that was put in, dividing the room, so it was actually much smaller, but it was felt that so we could have a room each and have a bit more independence from each other. So I mean, it's, you know, I don't really have a lot of memories from that home, actually. I don't know if that's odd or not. Going out to the shops with Christine a few times, who was the foster mother. Being at the house, being looked after by various childminders. They were generally about 15 to 20, I would guess, sort of that age. And going around various friends' house. There was a vicarage, Jeffrey's house, that we visited. with the Smiths, Shirley Smith and her family. They lived up on the high street, and various others that we'd visit. And I remember my biological half sister Louise. She visited a few occasions then. I do remember an incident, or an occasion, not an incident. We were sat out in the garden. Had a nice little garden actually out the back of Sandy Park Road, and little swing, paddling pool. Used to go out there and play with the other kids. A couple of kids, the neighbours, used to come around and that. I suppose I must have been relatively happy there. I think I was a relatively shy child. I don't think I talked a lot actually. I went to Holymead Infant School at the time. I've got photos from that, and I don't have any memories really of being there. A bit bizarrely, vague, very vague memories actually. I do. And then there's going to Holymead Juniors. It was the first of two junior schools I went to because we later moved houses. I don't ever remember any great arguments or anything awful going on in the house. So I don't really have any real memories that much of that time actually, to be honest. I don't know if that's normal. I do remember going to school, going to Holymead Junior School, going out, playing the playground, and there were a few people that I was sort of friendly-ish with. There was a guy down the road. I used to go and visit him. He was a school friend of mine, and used to like going around his house after school occasionally. We got on well. We sort of chatted quite well, and saw him many years later. And yeah, I mean, there was nothing from those few years that stood out as being that interesting. I mean, there's a complete absence almost of any memories from the house, actually. I don't really know why that is. That seems, if that's normal. And actually, because I don't really see anyone from those years, I don't have anyone to talk to me about any memories that might sort of bring back sort of memories, as you do when you're chatting with people. So I don't really have a lot of memories to share from those first few years, really. I think that there was a weird incident when I went to I was on the way back. I used to walk to and from school, I think. As I was on the way back from school, a car almost hit me over, oddly enough. And I didn't tell anyone about it. I just remember it was a bit weird. And yeah, I suppose... I suppose, yeah, I don't really have a lot of memories. Maybe I was a bit too young to sort of remember a lot, really. In any case, we moved, I think, when I was about 8 or 9, maybe I was 10 or something like that. We moved area, Bristol, moving from Brislington, transferring over to Fishponds. We went to a new house on Thingwall Park. It was a really big house, actually. A few more rooms, quite a large house with a really large garden as well. Had like a basement underneath it. And we lived there for many years. I'd probably guess about eight or so years, actually. And obviously we transferred schools as well. Went to a new junior school at that point. And it was quite a nice school, actually, to be honest. It seemed quite happy. I felt it was quite nice there. People were fairly friendly. I didn't feel intimidated or bullied or anything there. It's quite a nice kind of friendly kind of environment, actually. It's quite. I liked that school, actually. I've got quite a few happy memories of being there. I met a close friend that I got on well with. There were a few others I was fairly friendly with. There was a guy there who didn't speak any English, and I think I was sort of befriending him, and I was trying to sort of help him learn a bit of the language. And there was another guy that lived opposite me, and we became very close friends because we lived so near together. So we would walk to and from school, and we were both quite reserved. We were both a bit introverted, and so we kept to ourselves a lot, and we were sort of quite friendly with each other, actually, Robert and I, and we got on quite well, actually. So that was really nice. We went to an after-school club at the school as well. That was quite nice. I've got some happy memories there, sort of like pretending to be wrestlers, like who's going to be Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, that kind of thing, and like messing about on the playground, and I don't know, going to the tuck shop, and like making up these weird games, and we used to have fun, but we didn't really we didn't really fit into any of the groups. We weren't that sporty, and we weren't really that kind of like we weren't really clever or really strong, and so we were both a bit kind of loner, and we're both a bit sort of a bit outsiders, really. So we found each other, really, and I think that was quite nice, actually, that we had that. And actually, nicely enough, we both went to the same secondary school. We both then went on to Whitfield. Back then, it was called Whitfield Community School. I think, like a lot of schools, it's changed and it's become an academy now. So. But it's the same kind of location, and we used to do the walk together to and from school, So it was nice kind of having that continuity of a school friend. And, it's daunting, isn't it, when you go into a new school, up to senior school, and suddenly you go from being one of the oldest in the class to the school to being one of the youngest again. It can be quite intimidating, that. So I'm glad, that we had each other, because it could be quite rough, that school, sometimes. There was good and bad in that school, actually, if I'm honest. I think it could be sometimes a bit rough, in as much as, there were some people that were quite vocal, and I think there were a few people that, didn't take a liking to me or him, and a few others. And, there will be occasions where, there was a lot of name calling, and just generally putting you down and teasing and occasionally throwing stuff, or that kind of stuff. And it's just like large classes, lots of places, and I think it's sort of bound to happen. And I sort of try not to respond to it, really, and so it didn't affect me so much, I suppose. I suppose I witnessed some people getting a lot worse treatment, really. I mean, I was called a lot of names, really, then, like, but only by a few people. And he was too. The fact that we both spent a lot of time together, and we were always together, really. And I suppose because we'd known each other, and so it was that continuity, and we lived close. We used to go over each other's houses after school, playing computer games. Like he had an Amstrad back then. I had a Game Boy, and we'd play different games and that sort of stuff. And so we stuck together at school and that. And there were a few teasing you with stuff like calling you names, thinking you're gay, and calling you all those sort of innuendos. And it's kind of weird, really, because I didn't really have any sexuality at that point either. So I kind of think it was a bit weird, really. But we were just friends, like, and I'm really grateful, looking back, that I had that support, actually. It's nice that I felt like, that we did get on and we were close, actually. And I think there was just one occasion where we had beef and we fell out over something stupid. And like these guys at school who like to sort of like tease us sometimes, and then they saw this as their opportunity, and they were really like trying to gear me up to sort of like, and saying like he'd said all this stuff about me because we'd had a really public argument, like it was our one big falling out, and had a bit of a tiff, a stupid thing, really. And they saw this, and so they took advantage of it. They were like psyching us up for fight and feeding me all this information, like he said this about you and that. And we were meant to meet up, and they were going to sort of arrange some sort of fight. But no, neither of us showed up, and we sort of made up somehow. So I'm glad about that, and that was nice. Yeah, so we kind of got along, and like we realised we don't want to fight each other. We're like, even though we pissed each other off a bit, it didn't make any sense, really. And we sort of made up, got on with it. And that's, yeah, it really, God, if I had been totally on my own back then, it just would have been just horrible, actually. There were some nice people at school as well that you could chat to and get along with, but like what kind of happened with some people, like when they're around the other bullies and that, like they're kind of like keeping quiet and not saying anything and allowing it to happen, and some of them even joining in. And then when the bullies aren't there, they're sort of like want to be pally and friendly with you. You kind of think, I can't be friends with you like that. And then other people, I suppose, don't join in, but they're kind of like, you feel they might be complicit because they're just sort of like, they're friends with those people. Or so there's very few people that you can be very close to and open up to. And so it really was kind of quite limiting. It's sad that there was a lot of harassment going on at that school. There was even a teacher harassed. Teachers were being harassed at that school. It just was kind of the situation going on there. There's one teacher, the guy broke off the chair legs off her stool and then balanced them back on there. And she was quite nice. I liked her. She was my art teacher. Sat on the chair, went flying back, and loads of people laughed about it. And I just thought, thankfully, he got expelled in the end, that one creep. And it's just like nasty trick to play on a teacher that I felt. There's just kind of loads of occasions like that going on. Like, and there was a blind teacher and they were like playing pranks on him and all this stuff. It was like, there were really some bad incidents going on at that school, like where I felt sorry for some of the teachers, really, like given that there were large numbers of people, lots of students, many with behavioural problems, and just not enough time to sort of focus the energy on like making sure people are treating each other with respect and that. And it's like when the students abusing teachers so much, like that, so you can imagine what's going on to some of the students outside on the playground behind the teachers' backs, and that it was happening so much. And I feel kind of bad that I witnessed some of it and I didn't step in and help some people on some occasions. And I kind of feel like I was sort of on my own, me and my friend. We didn't really have a lot of opportunity, really. I was very shy and introverted, I guess, back then. So I don't feel I had an opportunity to. So yeah, it's kind of, there were some nice people as well at the school too. There were some good things about the school as well. I had a French teacher that he was driven mad in some lessons by just the ferocity of how some of the students misbehaved, how they were vulgar and slandering, and just how they just used to misbehave and just really just they didn't want to be there. He just made a mockery of the whole class, And he resorted to bribery on some occasions. I liked it because I used to get free chocolate bars. It wasn't the best method, perhaps. He just lost his temper on one occasion and ended up throwing a chair across the room. It went into these other chairs and smashed them. And, I think he just felt so utterly frustrated that there were these people that are just taking and exhausting all the energy and making it so hard for the other students to even study, actually disrupting class to such an extent that it's making any kind of studying impossible, And to give you another example, you've got like a PE teacher who is trying to referee 2 football games that's going on, and he's spending most of the time with the professional players who might actually be part of the school football team. And so the players aren't as good and get, they're not going to get refereed or policed as much. And so, it's a good recipe to foul someone. And it's kind of hard to get to have a love of sports, when someone's literally throwing cricket balls at your face and there's like all you want. And so your job is to sort of duck and get away from the ball. Like, yeah, I mean, if the person bowling the ball like doesn't like you, that's kind of like not very nice. It's all part of it, I guess, isn't it, really? And I guess I'm fortunate that there was an extent to it. I suppose because I tried not to respond to it, really. I thought that was sort of the best strategy, just to sort of keep quiet, really, and not like respond to it all. And keep a low profile. That sort of, I don't know, seemed like the sensible way at the time to sort of get through it at school, really. And yeah, whilst I didn't make a lot of friends there. Sort of glad that I had that one friend, and that was enough to sustain me anyway. And I was sort of kind of glad I joined Scouts at some point through the school year, actually, and that was good for me. That really helped. I felt like I was more suited to that because it was more like physical, more active. We went out, we went into the woods, we made fires, we learned like really useful things like, well, tying knots, maybe not, but how to cook, uh, going out washing cars, earning money for charities and doing various things, like playing football when people are actually like refereeing it properly and taking an interest because there's enough adults per members of the class. So I felt like the scouting thing actually was like it so benefited me in a way that school didn't actually, where you were able to have that attention and that care actually from older people, and actually do really interesting projects and learn some interesting stuff as well, actually. And actually, some of the games were a bit rough there, but it was okay, because actually, the adults were always there supervising and they were able to step in if it went a bit out of hand. So I really liked it actually as a sort of thing that I did for a few years. It really benefited me a huge amount, and I look back and think it was a good experience that actually. And I was living in Thingwall Park during all those years. That was my home. I didn't have the closest relationship with my foster mother, Christine. We weren't like really close, to be honest, in fact. And there were a lot of arguments between us, in fact. I would say there was a huge amount of good things that she did, in fact. I mean, arranging for me to go to Scouts was one of those. She was very much an activities organizer. She was very good at organizing things. And I think that's why she was like such a good member of the church in that capacity. She was sort of proactive. She was sort of arranging things. She was sort of charismatic, like a people person. So, in a sense that she had a lot of energy about her. She enrolled me into the Beavers, St John's Ambulance program. So that was good also. That was learning basic first aid skills and, really useful things to learn at that young age. I think I still know my ABCs. I need to sort of brush up on it, I think, a bit now. But yeah, it's really useful actually. And she enlisted me into ballet at one point. I think I left actually because I think people were laughing about it because it was before Billy Elliot was on and just seemed a bit of a girly thing, and other guys laughed about it. It's not karate or anything, is it? Putting on a pair of tights and pouncing about. I did a production of The Ugly Duckling, and that was enough for one thing. She sometimes like enrolled me into things without sort of like asking me, or I felt kind of pressured into something she did, so I felt like, oh, I've got to do it. It was sort of asking me, but I felt like I had to sort of do it to make her happy sometimes. So I felt like sometimes our relationship was such that I kind of felt like I wanted to please her so that she wouldn't get angry at me. She did occasionally lose her temper and shout, as any parent would. But I think that she perhaps did do it quite often at some point. Not saying all the time, but there was a period where she was more prone to being angry. But, I'm not saying that was all throughout the years because there were many, many years there. But one thing she was very good at was organising participation in various groups. And I was glad about that. And going to the Beavers, the Scouts. But it was also, I joined up to a group called Splash during the summers. So that they would have an activity group. I think it was run by the police, in fact, where foster children were eligible to sign up for activity programs, I guess to keep them out of trouble during the summer months when school wasn't operational. And that was really great. So I got to go canoeing through that program, and a few other kind of things like that. And I went and did my cycling proficiency test through that. I went on the Duke of Edinburgh Award. That was a great thing. I think that was through the Scouts, actually. Yeah. And we got horribly lost, actually. And my map reading skills were really abysmal. And I sort of let the group down a bit. I kept saying it's just a few more miles, and it wasn't. But we got back eventually, and our group bonded really well, and I thought that was the most important thing. We all had a laugh and enjoyed ourselves. We never won anything, and we often were last or near the back, but I kind of got on well with the other guys at Scouts, and it was nice towards the end, the last year there. I actually became a group leader, so that was really nice. It was nice to be responsible for others, and to sort of have to think for them as well, actually. Even if I was not good at map reading and that, and like we did win on one occasion because one of the other guys called his father to give us a lift to the end, but we that was sort of cheating. And so yeah, we had lots of different groups that were really beneficial for that. And I think she was good at organising things like that. She had a good regime at home in terms of being very practical. There were washing up rotas. People took their turn to do their fair share, and in various other things like cleaning up around the house, looking after the animals. That was very good in as much as learning responsibility, in fact. I think that's probably a useful thing to learn. I had a newspaper round that I inherited. My older brother, the biological son, Daniel, he gave up it. And so I would do that an evening or two a week and started earning my own money. So I think there were very useful lessons to learn, actually, in that. And I went out delivering newspapers. That was a good thing to earn money, actually. I remember earning my first £100. That was really useful, and it's nice to sort of feel like you're earning money, in fact. And even the pocket money there was earned. It was earned through doing different chores that we all did. There were loads of different rotas, like for cleaning and that. And I liked that idea that everyone sort of played their part and learned responsibility at an early age. That was really nice, actually. And so I think there was sort of, she was good at that, and she always made sure there was food on the table, that people were well fed there, that practically, people had clean clothes, that the washing was done. The house was always to a reasonably clean standard and that. And I think she herself, must have spent a lot of time and energy devoting to that, I suppose. And I think that's, I can see that that's a lot of hard work. She worked as a preacher in a church, and she was also a foster mother. Like I said, there were various other foster children that stayed there. I don't remember them all, but I certainly remember a few. And I think there was one in particular that obviously that struck me and I always remember. And it's a very sad occasion, actually. A young baby stayed there, and I think the mother of the baby stayed there too. And there was some concern, I think, about whether the mother had been responsible for some injuries to the child or something, and that was in doubt. In any case, the little baby remained there, and stayed there for a while. And actually, I do have a memory of sort of holding the child, as you do, and sort of looking after or looking child minding, I guess while Christine was doing other things. And so I think, it was quite nice in that way that we took some little role in looking after the younger children, in that holding them or caring for them. And I think on that occasion it was a bit sad, really, but the baby had died when it went back to its foster parents or its mother. Something happened to it there. So it's I suppose that happens, doesn't it? It's just sad to sort of to know that at a young age, but I suppose it come from a troubled family and that, and but I sort of vaguely remember other foster children there, but I sort of don't have a strong memory of them staying that long. I think they were mostly short term,